Hi, I'm Neil Christensen, author of Dark White and host of Book Talk Writers Group. Welcome to another edition of I'm Reading House of Leaves, so you don't have to. Today, we're covering Chapter 5. Chapter 5 was brutal. Chapter 5 was 32 pages of chapter, plus 57 pages of appendix letters. We'll get to those letters. But that was really the part that basically broke me. Although I knew I was in for a doozy right from the beginning, as Chapter 5 starts with 7 pages on the history of the myth of echo. It's impossible to appreciate the importance of space in the Navidson record without first taking into account the significance of echoes, is the first line of Chapter 5. Then we go on for 7 pages about the history and significance of echo. But not echoes like we're talking about, the mythological goddess Echo. It's not until the very end of those 7 pages that we get to the crux of it, to the important thing. And that is the significance of space in terms of producing echoes that we hear. Zampono thinks it's really important to understand that echoes require a certain amount of space to be created. And I think we all know that intrinsically, but he thinks it's important to understand the specifics. Point of fact, the human ear cannot distinguish one sound wave from the same sound wave if it returns in less than 50 milliseconds. Therefore, for anyone to hear a reverberation requires a certain amount of space. At 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the book tells us, sound travels at approximately 1,130 feet per second. A reflective surface must stand at least 56.5 feet away in order for a person to detect the doubling of their voice. This becomes important. But first we break off into one of Johnny Truant's long, rambling stream of consciousness stories. We learn that Johnny is starting to not feel well. He's starting to have hallucinations. He's starting to feel anxious about leaving his apartment. And he's starting to have these moments where he smells rot and death and feels sick and starts having panic attacks. These moments last a significant amount of time, and then he snaps out of them as quickly as they come on. We also start learning more about his obsession with Thumper. Thumper is the stripper name for the girl that his boss is dating. Johnny is infatuated with her. Back in Zampono's story of Navidson, we learn that Will's brother, Tom, has decided he needs to leave. As soon as he leaves, Will and Karen's relationship begins to deteriorate quickly. Will is obsessed with the space differential in the house, and he's focusing all his time and attention on that. Karen wants nothing to do with this and avoids the subject at all costs. This results in Will and Karen speaking very little together. It also means that they're both kind of in their own heads, and they're paying less and less attention to the children who start to wander outside. And so they wander the grounds of the house and wander inside the house. Will's friend Billy Reston from the university is also spending more and more time at the house trying to understand the anomaly. In the month following the expansion of the walls bracketing the bookshelf, Billy Reston made several trips to the house where, despite all efforts to the contrary, he continued to confirm the confounding impossibility of the interior dimensions greater than the exterior one. So at some point, while Will and Karen are in separate rooms, not paying attention to their kids, they hear the kids begin to scream. And this is the moment that we get into the real meat of the story. The terrifying implication of the children's shouts is now impossible to miss. No room in the house exceeds the length of 25 feet, let alone 50 feet, let alone the previously mentioned 56.5 feet. And yet, Chad and Daisy's voices are echoing. Navidson and Karen both run to the living room where it sounds like the voices are coming from. That's where they find it. In the living room, Navidson discovers the echoes emanating from a dark, doorless hallway which has appeared out of nowhere in the west wall. So now we have a new space in the living room. The point of echoes is to explain that for the kids' voices to echo, that hallway had to be at least 56.5 feet deep. The trouble is that on the other side of the wall that the hallway protrudes into is the outdoors. There is no way on the interior of the house for that hallway to extend into. And yet there it stands. Obviously, Karen is having none of this, and Will wants to explore. Will ends up contacting his brother Tom to come back and help him install a door. The weird thing is, when Tom arrives to install the door, the hallway has shrunk and is now less than 10 feet deep. Still an impossibility for its location, but not the 60-foot deep hallway that was there earlier. Tom goes ahead and installs the door with 4 deadbolt locks on it and closes the door and begins to lock the door, one lock at a time. However, when he gets to the last lock, as he twists the key, the accompanying sound contains a familiar ring. He grips the red key and tries it again. As the deadbolt glances off the strike plate, the resulting click creates an unexpected and very unwelcome echo. Slowly, Tom unlocks the door and peers inside. Somehow, and for whatever reason, the thing has grown again. Later on, Navidson asks his brother Tom, "What do you think we do with that?" Tom's reply, "Move," which is exactly what Karen wants to do. She insists that no one go in there, and there becomes this ultimatum between her and Will that if he ever goes back in that hallway, she will leave him, and she will leave the house, and she will take the kids with her. Later, the Navidsons, trying to have some sense of normalcy, end up having some friends over for dinner. As they're sitting around talking, one of his friends suggests, "I bet you even have a darkroom somewhere in this house." Navidson says, "Oh, you want to see a dark room?" And that's when he decides to show the hallway to his friends. He opens the hallway, and the existence of the hallway and the paradox it creates makes them so unsettled that they all leave. Karen is pissed and makes Navidson sleep on the couch. While everybody's asleep, he decides he is going to explore the hallway and take a camera with him. He unlocks the deadbolts, opens the door, and is met with a gust of cold air. He enters anyway. Upon walking down the length of the hallway, he finds it to be, in his estimation, about 75 feet long. When he gets to the end, he turns around to head back and finds a new doorway that had not been there before. Navidson carefully points his flashlight into this new darkness and discovers an even longer corridor. This one is easily, I'd say, 100 feet. A few seconds later, he comes across a still longer corridor, branching off to the left. It's at least 15 feet wide, with a ceiling well over 10 feet high. The length of this one, however, is impossible to estimate, as Navidson's flashlight proves useless against the darkness ahead, the beam dying long before it can ever come close to determining an end. Finally, Navidson stops in front of an entrance much larger than the rest. It arcs high above his head and yawns into an undisturbed blackness. His flashlight finds the floor, but no walls, and for the first time, no ceiling. Only now do we begin to see how big Navidson's house really is. While wandering in here, he finds himself lost. Part of the reason for this is he discovers that the walls and doorways move while you're inside them. Eventually, he gets frightened, thinking he won't find his way out. He becomes desperate enough to call for help, and he calls for Karen. He calls Karen's name over and over again, shouting as loud as he can, trying to find his way back. Eventually, he hears a voice. But it's not Karen's voice. It's the voice of his daughter, Daisy, shouting for him outside the hallway. He's able to follow this voice until he finds a long corridor that ends in a speck of light at the end of it. He rushes down it and out of the hallway, embracing his daughter, who says, "Daddy, I had a nightmare." At this point, we hop back to Johnny's story. Johnny is falling apart and blaming it squarely on the pages of Zampono's manuscript. At some point while he's at work, his boss sends him back to get... Oh, wait, did I mention? Johnny works in a tattoo shop, but he's not a tattoo artist. He's a receptionist. And he also makes, apparently, the best needle bundles. So even though he's not very good at his job, his boss keeps him around because he really likes his needle bundles. But his boss sends him back to the closet where they keep all the ink. And while he's back there, Johnny has one of these hallucinations and panic attacks. And he ends up stumbling out of the closet onto the floor in the tattoo parlor, breaking bottles and ink all over himself and the floor, and scaring everyone in the tattoo parlor, including his boss. His biggest regret, though, was that Thumper was there and saw it. As we near the end of Chapter 5 proper, there's a reference to an Appendix E. The editors of the book want you to understand that while Zampono's manuscript pages are what Johnny believes are driving him crazy, that there may be a simpler explanation. Johnny's mother was institutionalized for most of his life, and during the years of institutionalization, she wrote him letters. This appendix contains these letters and suggests that if you want some more background on Johnny and his potential for instability, that this would be a good place to go. So of course I did. And as I said, there are 57 pages of letters. They're spread across years, starting when he was a child, and they continue on to adulthood. Most of the letters are pretty sweet and straightforward. They're loving words from his mother, encouraging him and supporting him, and asking for him to come and visit her, or at least respond to the letters. These letters are also how we get a lot of Johnny's backstory. We learn that first his mother was institutionalized, and then later his father died. He was put into the foster system and bounced around for years. Eventually, he ended up in a final family, but the father was an abusive ex-Marine. After a certain amount of time, Johnny can't take it anymore, and he just runs away from home and goes to Alaska. At this point, apparently, Johnny had begun to write back and forth with his mother. We never see any of Johnny's letters, but his mother refers to his letters in writing back to him. But over time, Johnny's mother begins to show signs of deterioration and dementia and paranoia. Her letters reflect this worsening condition through paranoid accusations about the hospital doing things to her or taking things from her, about the director who she had consistently referred to as a good man before, this director now being replaced by a new director who was awful and horrible and had turned the staff against her. She gets to the point of saying that she can't even write him letters because they're looking through her letters before they go out to make sure she's not saying anything. So she tells Johnny that she's going to write him a next letter and have it coded. This next letter is indeed coded. As you can see, the letter itself makes no sense. It's just a random stream of consciousness that isn't even cohesive as a meaningful sentence at any one point. Sort of like the ramblings of a madwoman. But if you take the time and follow her code and highlight the first letter of each word, it does indeed break down into a narrative. Dearest Johnny, they have found a way to break me. Rape a 59-year-old bag of bones. There is no worse, and don't believe otherwise. The attendants do it. Others do it. Not every day, not every week, maybe not every month, but they do it. Someone I don't know always comes when it's dark, late. I've learned not to scream. Screaming gave me hope, and unanswered hope is shattered hope. Think of your Haitian. It is far saner to choose rape than shattered hope. So I submit and I drift and I let caprice and a certain degree of free association take me away. Sometimes I'm still away long after it's done. After he's gone, the stranger, the attendant, the custodian, the janitor, cleaning man, waiting, dirty man in the night. Tidy up after him. I'm in hell, giving in to heaven, where I sometimes think of your beautiful father with his dreamy wings, and only then do I allow myself to cry. Not because your mother was raped again, but because she loved so much which she could never have been allowed to keep. Such a silly girl. You must save me, Johnny. In the name of your father, I must escape this place or I will die. That's why this chapter took me so long to put together. In addition to the code that she described, I found another code buried inside there. There were occasionally capitalized letters in the middle of words, and when you put those together, you find a short phrase: a face in a cloud, no trace in the crowd. After that letter, his mother begins to get better for a while. Her letters become more coherent. She apologizes for the rantings and ravings of her previous letters, admits that there never was a new director. It has always been the same man, and he is kind and he is good, and that she misses Johnny and wants him to come see her. The appendix ends with a letter from the director informing Johnny that his mother has passed away, having hung herself with her bedsheets. And the chapter ends with Will Navidson deciding he isn't going to tell Karen that he went in and explored the space in the hallway. Surprising peace and harmony seems to come back to the house. Will and Karen make up, and everything seems to be going just fine. Karen begins looking into options for selling the house, and Will agrees to let Reston take over the investigation of the hallway. The very end of the chapter has Daisy approaching Will and saying, "Daddy, will you play with me?" And he says, "Sure, what do you want to play?" And she says, "Always." He shrugs it off and thinks it just means they always want to play. Zampono points out that always sounds an awful lot like a child's mispronunciation of hallways. Okay, guys, this was a tough chapter to get through. It was a dense chapter, and it took a lot of actual physical work to read it and go through it, to highlight all those letters in the letter. I mean, it probably took me 4 hours to go through that one letter, to highlight everything and put it all together. But this is where the book is starting to get interesting. There's this hallway that appears, and it changes dimensions. It changes shapes. This is starting to get to the meat of the story, and it's starting to get a little spooky. I'm starting to really get into it. I will tell you that I've already read further than chapter 5, and I'm really starting to get into this book. But it does not get easier the deeper you go. In fact, the deeper you go into this book, the harder it is to read and the more work it takes. And there are times when I pick up this book to read for 5 minutes and go, forget it. I can't do this today. This is the most interesting and unique book I've ever read, and I will continue doing this for you, as difficult as it is. I don't have a lot of analysis. I'll just say it was a slugger to get through, and I'm glad I'm through it. So what I've told you, that's what happens, but also I'm leaving out a ton of stuff. And some of it's important and some of it's not. I think my point is the only real way to experience this book is to read it. So if you think that by hearing my synopsis that you're getting everything from the book, I couldn't disagree with you more. I couldn't possibly convey everything there is in this book. It's the reason there isn't an audiobook version of this book. You cannot experience it without reading it for yourself. So if you are liking this series, if you are liking the videos that came before this, and you are excited to see the videos that come after it, I encourage you, go out and pick up a copy of House of Leaves, because you will get way more from it if you actually read it and read along. Read a chapter and then watch the video. All right. Thanks so much. Chapter 6 is pretty short and quick, so that'll be a nice one to kind of refresh the palate. But chapter 7, that's another story.